Welcome to MetabolicHealth.com's second live broadcast to our Twitter and YouTube accounts. If you haven't checked out our first broadcast with world-renowned heart surgeon Dr. Philip Ovadia, I encourage you to check that out as well, though I do apologize in advance for the issues with the audio. Thankfully, we don't anticipate that to be a problem this time around. And now, for our esteemed guest of the evening, the innovative Dr. Shan Oma, a guy who knows his way around an MRI machine, I must say, and is using MRIs in ways no other doctor, as far as I'm aware, is using them, and using them to identify early warning signs of impending chronic diseases before they show up. He's developed protocols to eliminate these early warning signs and get folks on the path to good health. He's also using these protocols to fight against the epidemic of chronic diseases in individuals who already have chronic disease. So before we dive into things, Dr. Shan, I just want to express my sincere gratitude to you for lending us your time this evening. I found out about you very recently when you were making the rounds on seemingly all of the top podcasts, and was honest to God blown away by what you're doing for your patients and the results that you're getting for them. So to get to the point here, we, kind of our two organizations, think that our missions align really well. So to the extent that we can share what you're doing to help people with as many folks as possible, we want to do that. So without further ado, Dr. Shan Oma, welcome to the broadcast. How are you doing?
Doing so good. Really excited to be with you guys here. Love what you guys are doing. Very impressed. You're doing a lot of work, a lot of homework, and we're excited to be a part with what you're doing and align ourselves this evening with this program. And I hope everybody that's participating can benefit from it. I might say just at the outset, Dr. Ovadia and I are friends. We are also both graduates of Penn State. So it's interesting to have two Penn Staters start off your show to do the first live. So he's a tough act to follow. He's a super smart guy. And I'm excited to have a heart surgeon in this particular space of health optimization, and also understanding with better insights and appreciation the contribution or role that cholesterol plays in health. And it's not the bad player that the system would have you believe it is. So I'm excited to have the opportunity to be here and follow in the footsteps of the likes of Dr. Ovadia.
Absolutely. Well, great. I think let's jump into it then. I guess to start us off, I must say that you have one of the most interesting career backgrounds that I've ever heard of. Could you maybe start off by providing an overview of your background and how you became a practicing physician?
Yeah. So I grew up just like pretty much average person in average home. My dad worked for the railroad, and then he's a World War II veteran and got a job with the government. So that helped our lifestyle out. But I attended public school, and then I went to a community college, had a great experience with a police instructor. I wanted to be a police officer, and he got me excited about learning, and I started studying hard and ended up getting straight A's in a community college, and I transferred to Penn State University. During that time, I worked as a police officer while I was finishing my college degree. And I did well enough in undergraduate that I decided I wanted to go to law school and become a criminal prosecutor and serve the public. I have a very strong desire to do noble and important tasks. So I felt a call to public service and decided to be a criminal prosecutor. Before I went into prosecution, I worked actually as an undercover narcotics agent and did undercover drug work in the Atlantic City, Philadelphia, New York area. It was very exciting for a young guy, 22, to be involved in that kind of work. And then I decided I wanted to be a narcotics prosecutor. So I went to law school, went to Villanova University School of Law. I graduated from law school and became a criminal prosecutor in Philadelphia and practiced for 3 years. And during that time, I couldn't get away from my interest in science and medical science. I wanted to be a physician. Really, my whole life, I got a little distracted because my parents were hit by a drunk driver, and my dad was killed, and so I was a little bit sidetracked. And when I couldn't solve and fix the criminal justice system the way I wanted to, I decided to return to my interest in science, and so I left my job in the prosecutor's office and donned a security guard uniform and worked as a night watchman. Even though I was an attorney, I sat there, I got $7 an hour to study all night long. It was just enough money to cover my rent and my food. I wasn't married, and I had a dream that I was going to chase. I wanted to be a physician. So I knew I was going to have to crush it because I didn't have any sciences in undergraduate school. So I got straight A's again in my pre-science classes. I did well enough on the med school aptitude test and got into all the schools that I wanted to for medical school. Took my first choice, which was Temple University in Philadelphia. Got a scholarship because I had good grades to attend medical school through the U.S. Army. And boy, it was a great scholarship. So after I finished medical school, I went and did a residency in emergency medicine, and in an Army Brooke Army Medical Center down at Fort Sam Houston, Texas. And then after I finished my residency program, I was an ER chief in an Army hospital in Korea, and got selected to be the Outstanding Physician of the Year for the U.S. Army. And then I got to take care of Vice President Cheney, President Clinton, later President Bush, and Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice and Secretary of State Colin Powell. So I had lots of experience taking care of high-end people. And then I decided to set up a company. I left the Army, finished my obligation. We were in Iraq and Afghanistan at that time. And my wife begged me to get out of the Army. We had 3 young kids, 4, 5, and 6, and others on the way. And so I left the Army, got an honorable discharge, and set up a concierge medical practice taking care of billionaires and royal families. It was a very interesting practice. And I couldn't get them interested in optimizing their health. I built them basically ICUs in their homes and mini hospitals. And I couldn't get them interested. I grew in my own interest in optimizing my health, and I couldn't get the wealthy people interested in doing that. They all wanted to get disease and then be fixed. So if you're listening today, I'd like to make that point. A lot of people say, well, the wealthy have an advantage over the rest of us. They can be more healthy because they got no money. And I would tell you, taking care of billionaires, they are at a disadvantage because of that money. They can't say no to the best foods and the best, pleasurable seeking lifestyles. But you can if you're listening. And I hope, by the end of this program, you become very interested in wanting to become the healthiest version of yourself that you can possibly become. Because that's where I am today. I've left my practice of emergency medicine to do a new specialty that I call health and performance optimization. And I'm as passionate as any human being in the world about trying to optimize humans and eradicate disease and take them and explore new levels of biological optimization for our species. And I like to promote that and talk to people about that and what it looks like and how, in my opinion, it's one of the most important things that you can do is take care of your most important physical asset, which is your body. So that's a pretty decent introduction, I think.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Thank you for providing that overview. You run a very, very innovative medical practice, and we're going to get into exactly what you do for your patients. But where do you think that innovation comes from? I mean, do you feel like it comes from your background as a police officer, as a lawyer, all the great, amazing things that you've done throughout your life? Like, where do you get that from?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think it has less to do with, aptitude for, technology. What I think is belying my interest in being innovative is I've always had a penchant and a desire to improve things, improve myself, and become a better version of myself. And I have just a high degree of personal motivation. And once I find something that I'm interested in, my motivation drives me to pursue it. And so I've tried to become the best ER physician, the best physician I could in the Army, and I got the award for at least 1 year, 2004. You only get that award one time. And then when it came to my understanding health optimization, and it was a foreign concept, then my passion for excellence and to always improve took over. And so I think it was something that was ingrained in me. And I'll take a risk here and try to be as sincere and real as I can possibly be. I have a personal theory that it has to do with my microbiome. And as I research health and performance optimization, I've become more aware of the contribution to our health that comes from our microbiome, which is a collection of microbes that reside within you. And research has shown that dependent upon certain species that you have within your microbiome, those species provide your motivation to exercise. And in the absence of those species, you have less or no motivation to exercise. So whether somebody exercises or not really is determined, or at least associated with, certain microbes. And so to the extent that you can get certain microbes to be resident within your gastrointestinal tract, they provide degrees of motivation for you to do things, such as maybe learning, exercising, how you eat, really how you live, what you do. And so I try to leverage as much as possible my microbiome by the choices I make to try to get the very best microbes inside of me as I can, and avoid ones that would cause perhaps a lack of motivation, or somehow decrease my state of biology, my state of health. So I think that's probably the truest answer I can give why I am the way I am. And I would point to, contrast is I have an identical twin brother who's a monozygotic twin. And what that means is we were a single fertilized egg within our mother, and then that fertilized egg split. And so we came from the same genetic material, and we grew up completely identical. I mean, you couldn't tell us apart. And yet we have lived different lives because we went to different schools, we went to different colleges, and that's where the separation took place. And I became incredibly disciplined and incredibly motivated. And my twin brother lacked discipline. He didn't have the same degree of motivation. And so we are not as healthy. We have different levels of health. He's much better, but it took him 5 years of me going after my identical twin brother to get interested in improving his health. And so that always fascinated me, that I couldn't get, the person who's for most of my life has been the closest to me to grasp how important it is to take care of your body and your health. So what that means to the audience is that, it can be a very difficult task. And a lot of my clients that I work with that I've successfully helped to optimize their health express frustration that their own siblings, their own family members, their best friends, colleagues they work with, they can't get them interested in health. So if you are listening today and you are genuinely desirous of improving your health, it's an exceptional thing, and you will not find it present to the same degree in other people. And it's just the way it is.
So you mentioned your microbiome's influence on your own personal health. Was that always the case? I understand you went through some health struggles throughout your life.
Yeah, so I did indeed. And so when I was in medical school, I was a little bit older because I had worked already as an attorney and was in law enforcement as a police officer. And so I had managed already to accumulate some forms of chronic disease. So I had very severe gastroesophageal reflux, which is the medical terminology for heartburn. And my heartburn was severe enough that I actually was on 3 different prescription drugs at one time and had severe esophageal metaplastic changes in my esophagus. So I had precancerous lesions in my esophagus by the time I was in medical school. And I was suffering immeasurably and already was being scoped and having, fiber optic scopes placed down my throat. And once I got that precancerous diagnosis of what's called Barrett's esophagus, I had to have that procedure done every 3 months. And it was a miserable thing. And I ultimately, I had it so many times, I wouldn't even use sedation. I'd be wide awake and they'd shove a garden hose down my throat to take biopsies looking for cancer. It was a miserable existence for me. And I also had high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, I had clogged arteries. I had erectile dysfunction. I had an enlarged prostate. I had eczema all over my body. I had restless leg syndrome. I kicked my legs all night long, and I would snore. I had obstructive sleep apnea. And I had declining memory. I was, early on forgetting things, and would tell my wife something, 2 hours later, I'd turn around, tell her the same thing, and she said, "You already told me that." And I'd say, "No, I didn't." This was at the age, at that point I was 48. And so, yeah, I had a lot of medical conditions. And so I didn't have any awareness of the microbiome until I got out of medical school. I mean, it's just not something that back then that was taught and shared in medical school. And there were a lot of things that I learned after I got out of medical school that played a huge role in improving my health. So it probably wasn't until about a year into discovering a biomarker that I hope we get into called visceral fat, and I started to eradicate visceral fat that I learned about the microbiome and the role that microbes play with our health and literally our quality of our life. So it's very exciting. And if I was to give a piece of advice to anybody listening today, find out as much as you can, develop an interest in the microbiome, then develop a love affair and passion about it, and then work to optimize and leverage your awareness of the microbiome so that you can have the greatest impact on your quality of life. That is my heartfelt advice to share with everybody listening today.
Well, so you mentioned visceral fat, and I'll ask this one question, and then I'll let Ryan take over because I know he's antsy to get in here as well. What is visceral fat for our audience? What are the major causes of visceral fat? And then maybe we can get into later on what your practice does in terms of trying to reverse visceral fat.
Yeah, so right behind me, I've blown up. For those that are not able to see this and might be just listening, I'm sharing an MRI image of what's called an axial or transverse cut through an abdomen of actually my fellow researcher who was responsible for introducing me to this biomarker called visceral fat. So it was Dr. Zhang, who is a heart disease researcher from University of Washington, Seattle, UW, and had moved his family to Minneapolis and started researching algorithmic mathematical applications to work on chronic disease. Is very interesting. And he noticed this white stuff inside the abdomen when he was doing MRI scans on people's backs, looking at chronic disease in backs. And he knows the people with the worst backs had the most amount of white stuff inside their abdomen. So he developed an interest on his own about visceral fat because he wasn't taught in medical school about visceral fat. So we accidentally came into each other. I shared with him I had an interest and passion for health. And he said, well, then you've got to find out about visceral fat and you need to come to my research practice and we'll scan you and measure for visceral fat. So that was the first time I found out about it. And what it is this inflammatory fat that you can see inside this abdomen. So this is the backbone, these are the back muscles. And this is the belly button at the top part here. And the dark structures on the sides are the oblique muscles, and the dark structures in the middle are part of your gastrointestinal tract, your intestines, your colon. And so all the other stuff, the white stuff there, is visceral fat. And it's problematic and has in my opinion, the single greatest contribution and cause of chronic disease that you could point a stick at is visceral fat, because it secretes continuously these inflammatory molecules that get released and are distributed throughout the body and cause disease and inflammation and really wreak havoc slowly over a period of time. It's not a fast, it's a trickle. And so over the years, as this visceral fat accumulates within you, so too does the influence of that visceral fat. And so what I've come to realize is it's less about the mechanical properties and the existence of that visceral fat than it is the inflammatory consequence of that visceral fat over a period of time. So you can have a small amount of visceral fat, but have that in there for a long period of time, and it will cause more disease than if you suddenly increase a large amount of visceral fat and just have it for a short period of time. And so the 5 big causes that Dr. Zeng and I went on to get funding from the National Science Foundation to study the reversal of chronic disease. And we utilized this biomarker visceral fat to evaluate the eradication and reversal of chronic disease by following and targeting visceral fat. And so we look for ways to eliminate visceral fat, but your question is spot on, and we should start at what causes it. So the 5 things that we found in our 7 years of study for the National Science Foundation is first and foremostly is processed foods, especially processed carbohydrates. And so as those are laid down, consumed by individuals, we see the deposition of visceral fat more so than subcutaneous fat. So it's the processed carbohydrates that first and foremostly contribute to visceral fat. And then secondly, it would be stress. We would see through the role of cortisol being produced when an individual has stress, and oftentimes stress is unrecognized. It is a serious health detriment, and I would go so far as to say a killer, because it oftentimes goes unrecognized and it contributes to this visceral fat. So everybody should be doing stress checks and being genuinely introspective about the level of stress that they have in their health and their life. And the third would be disrupted sleep. So if you are doing everything perfectly well, and you're only eating the very best food, and you're exercising perfectly well, and you're doing all these other great lifestyle strategies to optimize yourself, but you are not sleeping well, then you will have significant a contribution of visceral fat and detriment to your health through impaired sleeping. So it is mandatory, it is incompatible with life. If you are not sleeping, it will kill you if you do not get an adequate amount of sleep. So we spent a lot of time evaluating sleep for individuals in our study. The fourth one was alcohol. So alcohol has a significant contribution to metabolic health, and through poor metabolic health, we see its deposition and contribution in causing visceral fat to accumulate within the viscera and the abdomen of individuals. So I personally do not drink, and it's a consequence of my studies looking at visceral fat that I've elected, never have been a heavy drinker, but I don't drink a drop of alcohol to this day. And I recommend to my clients who are most passionate about trying to optimize their health to do the same thing. And the final one would be over exercise or too much labor. So if you are in a physical job where you're doing way too much work, especially what comes to mind is like if you're like an Egyptian slave from the Old Testament, a taskmaster, you're just doing slave labor. That is going to have a detriment on your health. And also, we see this in endurance exercise, where it's excessive, such as like distance running, especially like ultra distance running, marathons or ultra marathons. We would see elevated amounts of visceral fat in these people, despite their living relatively otherwise very healthy lifestyles. And interestingly, we would see the elimination of that visceral fat when they would stop running and change their form of exercise from distance running to sprinting. And I have a pretty nice slide of that comes up. So the big 5 ones again are processed foods, alcohol, sleep, stress, and endurance exercise would be the 5 big henchmen that cause visceral fat.
Yeah, that's such a great explanation of a complex topic and the causes thereof. Throughout our conversation already, the words chronic disease and healthy have been used. Obviously, we represent metabolichealth.com, and metabolic health as a concept has really been gaining ground in recent years, especially being paired against metabolic syndrome. We would love to hear, and part of the reason why we do this podcast, speaking to experts from so many different domains, your own definition of what metabolic health, metabolic wellness looks like. And you mentioned people like long distance runners who otherwise are living a healthy life, but maybe are missing out on this key aspect of metabolic health. So we'd love to hear a little bit more about what your definition of metabolic health is.
Yeah. So metabolic health is just of paramount importance. I'm very excited that over the past 10 years, we've had increasing attention paid to metabolic health. And I have a little bit of a unique perspective on it because health, metabolic health, oftentimes is interpreted through laboratory values. I come at it from more of a macroscopic perspective. And what I mean by that is I believe metabolic health is a proxy for your health of your body. But I think we have, as a species, migrated, and as a profession, medicine, we have migrated into the laboratory domain where we are paying more attention to laboratory values at the expense of what we did ancestrally. And so I think that we've diverted our attention away from things such as the shape of our body, the shape and contour of muscles, how muscles adhere to our bodies, the appearance of skin, eyelashes, limbal rings around the iris of an eye, the white conjunctiva, the white of the eyes, how white they are and free of inflammatory looks, the presence of spider veins called telangiectasias, the appearance of fingernails and nail beds, toenails, the appearance of nail beds themselves, how red they are. So let me just pause for a moment and address that. Our ancestors would have been acutely aware of the appearance of their bodies and those people in their lives, their bodies as well. And we would have all been working to become the healthiest version of ourselves. And we would have done that throughout our entire existence. And we would have been very acutely aware of any decline in our health. So that because of the dependency and the necessity to be the healthiest versions of ourselves, because it went to our survival and to our quality of living, we would have had this driving force within us called selection pressure. It's an anthropological term that causes humans to be the very best versions of themselves as possible, survival of the fittest, because if you weren't really healthy, you would be eliminated from the gene pool, because you would be the first one up for being eliminated by a predator, which oftentimes was another human. And your quality of life would not be as good nor as long. And so children are a great example of health. I tell people, my clients, if you want to see a healthier version of yourself, look at your kids. And I tell kids, if you want to see an unhealthier version of yourself, look at your parents. So kids have really red, beautiful red fingernails and toenails. The nail beds are rich with saturation of hemoglobin. The degree to which this wonderful molecule has oxygen bound to it can be visually assessed by looking at the nail beds. And that's why women paint their fingernails and toenails, the most popular color is red. Because biologically, our brains ping on the fact that person is healthy. And we are deeply attracted to healthy people as a matter of imprinting in our brains. So we have, as a species, a desire to value health. But as we have become more sophisticated, we're becoming exposed to and familiar with and accustomed to disease. And so at no point in the history of humanity has there been more chronic disease afflicting our species than today. We are the most diseased we have ever been. And so I am gravely concerned that that familiarity with all that disease will breed complacency and cause us to become increasingly more comfortable with disease and just treating it with prescriptions. So metabolic health is a goal, but exactly how you go about pursuing it and attaining it, in my opinion, probably is better served by the appearance of your body and how well you perform. So my definition of health, metabolic health, whatever objective you want to call or measure with regard to your health, is literally how good you look and how well you perform. So it's appearance and performance that I try to improve and optimize in my clients, and less so laboratory values.
Yeah, there's definitely so much wisdom in that approach. And it makes me think of quotes from Hippocrates, just thinking about it's more important to know the person that has a disease than the disease that a person has, as well as probably the most famous of them, that all disease begins in the gut. And certainly some wisdom to his approach. He witnessed the Peloponnesian War and saw Greeks having to perform at their highest levels of physical fitness in order to win battles. So there's definitely value to that anthropological approach. I'll add as a side plug, my sister-in-law is a professor of biology, and her PhD thesis was actually on the influence of antibiotics on the microbiome, the gut microbiome, and how that influences motivation of mice to exercise. And this research has since been replicated by Harvard, among other universities, but a fascinating area where people are still digging in and trying to understand the impact of our interventions.
Super interesting. That's really, really interesting. Not at all surprised. I mean, we see this in fecal microbiota transplants, which we abbreviate as FMTs, where they actually will transplant feces from humans into other humans, and it was preceded by feces from animals into other animals, you know, to develop a model. But the obvious medium by which the results and the consequences of these transplants are achieved are through the microbiome. So I will predict that it will probably be the single most important area of research in the future, and for the time being, we'll be looking at FMTs and the role that they portend and will offer in the future for eradicating disease. And I might say, with regard to chronic disease, because it's come up a few times, that it's worth pointing out that in my humble opinion, it is the single greatest problem facing humanity. So I mentioned we're more diseased than we ever have been in our species, but let's look at the consequence of that. Chronic disease, nothing else, no other problem reduces human productivity more. Nothing impairs human performance more. Nothing else costs more money. No other problem. It is the largest part of our economy is healthcare, of which 90% is combating chronic disease, trying to treat it. And nothing else kills more people. Think about it. And why don't we talk about it? Isn't that interesting? The largest problem in our species, and we don't talk about it. So kudos for you guys, because you guys do. But we need more people, and I'm very excited that two young guys like yourself, at your age, appreciate the necessity for doing this and are doing what you are. I mean, it's fantastic. And I pray and I hope that it catches on so that more people can benefit from awareness about chronic disease, metabolic health, and can begin turning themselves around. And so the second challenge I'd like to leave the audience with is to understand the incredible benefit that befalls the man or woman today, ideally younger, who purposes to become the healthiest version of themselves, because their contemporaries will continue to become more diseased, unaware of even the potential to improve their health, much less optimize it. They will worsen while you, as you purpose to optimize your health, will literally get better every year you live. It's very exciting. So it represents the single most important physical asset you have is your body, the proper conditioning and maintenance of that body, and really living your life in a way that continues to optimize it as you age. So you should not be getting worse as you age. You literally should be getting better.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. And we love the solution-oriented mindset. There's definitely a lot of doomsayers out there. And I think what's exciting about the metabolic health community is that there's a large contingent of hope and spreading hope and letting people know that there is a path forward for them. Having said that, you talked a little bit about your practice, and we'd love to hear a little bit more about your methodology for evaluating patients and sort of the journey that you take people through as you help to optimize their health.
Sure. So I might start with this image here. This particular MRI here is a friend of mine who's in service with me in the Army National Guard. And at the time this photograph was taken, he was 27. He's now 31, but he has very little visceral fat. He's mostly very strong, very large muscles, and he's got a six-pack. And then contrast it to the... So I was trying to explain the difference between these two scans. So this individual here has a lot of visceral fat and very small muscles. And their muscles also have white streaks in them. So we work with individuals who want to reduce their visceral fat and reduce fat within their muscle, which actually has a technical term for it called myosteatosis, which probably is better understood by the average layperson as muscle marbling. So muscle marbling is probably appreciated in steak. If you see a steak, it has this marbleized look, and for most people, they think that is actually a preferential thing. But in humans, it's disease. It's inflammatory fat that gets into the muscles, associated always is aligned with visceral fat and declining performance. And so what you really want to be is more like a grass-fed cow. So you want to be eating a species-specific diet. So we work with our clients to get them off of carbohydrates. So cows that are fed grains and corn and soy, and actually I was surprised to learn a couple weeks ago on Drew Pruitt's show that they actually put Skittles and expired candy into cattle feed to fatten these cows up. And so we know in veterinarian science this is what happens. Why don't we know this in medical science? But we, in our studies of the National Science Foundation, saw this human marbling from carbohydrate consumption in humans. And so when you eat clean, eat more healthy fat and protein, then you don't have that contribution. So we use the MRI to help do that. And here are some examples of legs that show the difference. Here's at the bottom is a 74-year-old who's got very clean muscles without that deposition. And then right above them is a 74-year-old whose muscles are fragmenting, have lots of fat in and around them. And then as a nice example is a couple clients. This one has early on when they came to me, a lot of fatty infiltrates. And then this individual at the top has very lean muscles, and they're at the age of 77, so even older. So you can be old and have a dramatically lower level of chronic disease. And this individual eats a very zero carbohydrate diet, eats ferments, eats meat, and does a lot of walking and sprinting to achieve those kind of legs. And he also, when he's free, he goes out and hunts elk. In his day when he's working, he runs a banking system. He's chairman of the board of a banking system. So a highly accomplished professional. So just real quick, I'll show you an example of some scans where visceral fat can be seen removed in a series of 6 scans over 35 weeks. Visceral fat is shown here in red, and the individual cut out processed carbohydrates without any exercise was able to dramatically reduce their visceral fat over the course of 35 weeks from where they started. And if you see the red streaks in their muscles on the side, the oblique muscles, they're gone now. Those muscles are clear. And so Americans and humans around the globe who might be listening to this need to be aware of these processed foods, especially processed carbohydrates, causing visceral fat inside of their abdomens and the deposition of myosteatosis or fatty infiltrates within their muscles, which hopefully should be understood as being harmful to your performance of your muscles. And it's why we see atrophy, muscles that atrophy, and ultimately where you think of a 99-year-old man or woman, you think of a frail person with low muscle mass. And it's because sadly, we do not pay attention to visceral fat and its wicked step twin sibling that is myosteatosis, fatty infiltrates in the muscles. And so we see declining muscle mass and declining muscle performance. So I work really hard with my clients to bring awareness to them about visceral fat and this contribution of fatty infiltrates within their muscle. And if you're listening today, you can do the same thing. You can get an MRI of your abdomen to see where your visceral fat is. And you can also evaluate your muscles to see whether or not and the chances are you're going to have some fatty infiltrates within your muscles, and be aware of that and live a life free of processed foods. And the healthier you live, the less visceral fat and the less fatty infiltrates you'll have within your muscles.
Yeah, it's so impactful having the visualizations and even getting to see the progress that someone can undergo just from, that was 36 weeks you said, or 38 weeks?
That was 34 weeks. And then I mentioned to you earlier on in the show that the role of distance running. So this guy is a distance runner who is running 10 miles a day, 5 days a week. So 50 miles a week, good distance. And we take him from here and tell him to stop running. And the only change he did, no change in diet. He was doing all our strategies. He just secretly was running. And we rescanned him, and he still had visceral fat. So we confronted him about his running, and he admitted he was still running. And we threatened him with being kicked out of the study and no more free MRI scans. And so he agreed to stop running, and he started sprinting. Well, look at the difference between his MRI scans in just 2 months. So he goes from here with a lot of the white visceral fat inside of him to now gaining a six-pack, growing muscle, and eliminating almost all his visceral fat in less than 2 months, with the only change being sprinting. And so one of our most important strategies is exercise, and in fact, a particular type of exercise, sprinting. So in my opinion, it is the single most important form of exercise for a human being to do. And I think it should be encouraged. And sadly today, similar to how we encourage a low-fat diet and trying to pay attention to cholesterol and what I think really are red herrings, what you really should be doing is cutting out processed foods, not worrying about natural animal fats, but processed foods, carbohydrates, and eliminating distance running and substituting instead in its place sprinting. And there's two types of muscles: fast twitch and slow twitch. And when you follow your quality of life over your lifetime, and especially towards the end, it's the fast twitch muscles that most align with your quality of life. Whether you can pick up a bag of groceries, your grandchild, or correct yourself suddenly when you lose your balance and get knocked over, it's your fast twitch muscles that engage quickly and allow you to correct your balance. And it's why old people just fall over like a log, because they've lost those fast twitch muscles. So you want to sprint throughout your lifetime and lift weights and cut out processed foods, and do not allow the loss of your muscle tissue as you age.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Just looking at the scans, obviously you can see on the left one more presence of visceral fat, and on the outside of the bodies as well, you see a layer of fat. And I know you haven't spoken as much about that, and would be curious about what are sort of the qualitative differences between like this visceral fat inside of us. I know you touched on it, that there's biological activity associated with it. Curious why that's the case with visceral fat and not other types of fat. I'm not sure if we actually know the answer to that, but would be curious to hear more. Yeah,
great question. So what is helpful to take a look at is the fat on the outside. So, got diminished there. So there's a black line here, if you can see, that goes around here, and it separates this subcutaneous fat. So this is visceral fat in the middle. Your subcutaneous fat is around your outside, just underneath your skin. But this black line separates subcutaneous fat into two compartments. One is called the superficial subcutaneous fat, which is just on the surface of the skin. And the deep subcutaneous fat is deeper fat. Deep subcutaneous fat corresponds to visceral fat. So the more visceral fat you have, the more deep subcutaneous fat you have. Interestingly, the more superficial subcutaneous fat you have, you tend to have less visceral fat. It's very interesting. And so women that oftentimes get liposuction eliminate this superficial subcutaneous fat, and there's a molecule inside of that superficial subcutaneous fat that gets secreted called adiponectin. And adiponectin helps decrease obesity, fatty liver disease, heart attacks, strokes, cancer. It's a really great molecule. So when you get a liposuction, you get a tummy tuck, and you get that fat sucked out of you, you're sucking out the good fat that you want to have. It's insane, but they don't tell you about it, and it's not really well studied. And so not only do you risk complications from the procedure, but you actually contribute to poor metabolic health and overall declining state of health. So the difference between fat depots, or where fat is stored in the body, is explained by the molecules that get secreted by these different stores of fat. So visceral fat and deep subcutaneous fat secrete inflammatory substances, as I mentioned earlier, part of our discussion tonight, the inflammatory molecules. And then your subcutaneous fat, particularly your superficial subcutaneous fat, secretes this wonderful molecule called adiponectin, adiponectin, adiponectin. Google it, read about it. It's another wonderful bit of knowledge that you should find out about, because your doctor and the conventional healthcare system isn't going to tell you about it. So you're going to want to be aware of that particular molecule, and then work to maintain a thin layer of subcutaneous fat on your body. So what's interesting is, between these two molecules, the deep subcutaneous fat was eliminated by sprinting. So depending on how you live, your body gets rid of the bad stuff first. Visceral fat and deep subcutaneous fat go away when you sprint. And then, unfortunately, when you do distance running, your visceral fat and your deep subcutaneous fat seem to be more resistant and refractory to elimination. And so the type of exercise you do, how you live, the type of food you eat has this contribution in where these fat depots end up being created and either resolving, reversing, or growing. So it really is important how you live your life and what you do in terms of exercise and the kind of foods that you eat. And just to hit home, just so there's no doubt, in people's mind about the contribution of visceral fat and its connection to marbling. This guy's abdomen is filled with visceral fat, and look at his legs. Human marbling, all that white streak. And then this is an Olympic sprinter who's just wall-to-wall muscle. This is the healthiest abdomen I have ever seen in my medical career. This guy should be a world model. He's just fantastically healthy. And his legs show an absence of any fatty infiltrates. There's no human marbling. And no surprise, he's a world-class sprinter that eats clean, doesn't eat junky processed carbohydrates, and he's got these beautiful muscles as a consequence of that. So the take-home lesson is do sprinting, maximum intensity exercise, don't eat processed foods. You'll have an abdomen that's filled with muscle and not visceral fat. Your legs will be filled with muscles and not human marbling. And if you eat processed foods and you don't exercise appropriately, like sprinting, then your legs will be inflamed. And that explains in large part why people, when they get to be in their 70s, 80s, their legs are really shaky and weak because of all that inflammation and atrophy of those muscles.
Yeah, I think it's great getting a different perspective at the phenomenon, because as you noted earlier in the podcast and discussion, a lot of times people just get like a set of KPIs or numbers as far as how their health is going, and just seeing the images and thinking of someone's leg like a steak is definitely an an emotional type of experience. And I think it's something innovative that you're doing that definitely is helping to grip people and inspire change that maybe wouldn't otherwise. And we'd love to hear a little bit about maybe those reactions, like how it helps people to think about their health in a different way with this medium that you've been able to provide them with technology.
Yeah. So this scan oftentimes evokes a lot of emotional concern when people get scanned through their chest, and the center of their chest is their heart. And here is a big chunk of an inflammatory fat surrounding this individual's heart. And it's the guy that cut out processed carbs and wouldn't exercise. And in 13 weeks, look at the dramatic reduction in that inflammatory fat around his heart. So scanning abdomens show visceral fat. Scanning muscles and legs show human marbling, myosteatosis. Scanning heart show inflammatory fat around those heart. And what you want to see is that fat eliminate. Who cares, honestly, what happens to 7.9 billion people in the globe? What you care about the most is what's happening inside your body. So that's why I advocate getting these scans so that you could take a look. And as far as an emotional impact, there's no better example than this guy who got scanned after I showed him his image, after I showed him examples of what's good and what's bad. And when I pulled up his scan, he literally passed out. He went unconscious. He was standing up, fell down and hit the ground right in front of me, terrified me. I thought he was having a heart attack. And for that reason, I no longer pull up scans without people sitting in a chair, because they get so upset. There's all sorts of colorful language. F-bombs get dropped when they see their scans. So you should be prepared for the emotional impact, the amount of disease that oftentimes surprises people inside their abdomens, around their hearts, inside their skeletal muscle, like in their arms and their legs. It's profound, the amount of invisible disease that's kept from you and sadly ignored by conventional medicine. It's not reported and it's not read. It's not taught in medical school. And how when this is by far the largest part of the abdomen, how it can be ignored when it's so connected to chronic disease. And if you're listening today, please do this. Go to Google and type in whatever is afflicting you, whatever condition you have. And if you're 20 and you don't have a condition yet, type in your mom's or your dad's or your grandfather's. And then put a comma behind it and type 2 other words, visceral fat. And see all the studies that show the association of whatever it is that's ailing your loved one or yourself. And then ask yourself, how is it possible that this disease is associated with it and it's causal, and there's this well-known study, and I've never heard about it. And that's the influence of the largest part of our economy, healthcare, making money off the disease and keeping people from being aware of this very important exploitable biomarker, visceral fat, and why you want it out of your body, and nobody will tell you about it. I have to teach physicians that read CTs and MRIs about visceral fat, because they look right by it. They don't even know what visceral fat is, and they're reading other disease, but it's not part of their training. So it's a very bad situation, guys, that we're in, and so it's really important that people take it upon themselves to get these scans, because the system won't do it for you. And I hope one day to successfully get incorporated into the curriculum in medical schools the teaching of visceral fat within the muscles, myosteatosis, and the fat around the heart, because it isn't taught. I've had heart surgeons admit to me that they don't even are aware of fat around the heart when they're cutting through these hearts with clogged arteries, because it's not part of their training. That's how bad it is.
Yeah, and as you noted, these are biologically active substances in our body. So they're emitting things like hormones and inflammatory substances, and likely those are traveling elsewhere throughout the body and manifesting in problems. Would you be able to talk about maybe some of the external signs that you have a visceral fat problem going on? Like, where might we see it manifested elsewhere in the body?
Yeah, so a big one is a bulging abdomen and in an anterior plane. So belly sticking out like this, head and your belly button is pointing forward, okay, the dad bod. 5 months, a strategy is to reduce visceral fat, flatten that abdomen, eliminate visceral fat. So if you do, the strategies that we figured out for the National Science Foundation has that kind of profound effect. But oftentimes there's a dad bod. Oftentimes it's best appreciated, in the lateral view. So to the extent that your abdomen is sticking forward, it reveals a couple things. One, that you could have an accumulation of visceral fat. But even if I took this abdomen here, surprising, and eliminated visceral fat, that belly is going to stick out because the visceral fat caused weakening of those muscles. So I'll show you an example of that in my own my own photographs. So here I am in this particular image here, and I have a belly that's sticking out. Okay. And then on the image here, my abdomen is flat. But right here, you might think I have a bunch of visceral fat, but I don't. So I'll show you my MRI scan to reveal that I really just don't have much visceral fat in that scan. And so what happened is these muscles in the anterior upper portion of my abdomen can't hold my guts in. And so my intestinal tract and my colon is now protruding anteriorly, pushing out. And then as my body continued to improve over a period of time, my abdomen flattened, less inflammation around means that where my veins are flat now, you can see my veins in my hand, and the crooked back, my neck is crooked. In this image here, my head looks weird, and dramatic improvement in my appearance from that elimination of that visceral fat. So it just causes weakening of your muscles and declining performance. And I can't say it enough. You want your muscles to perform, and it's like the frog in cold water that's slowly heated up, that example. And I understand that that's not even true, that a frog will jump out, apparently. But regardless, the principle stands that when something slowly accumulates over a period of time, it oftentimes goes unrecognized. And that is the sad state of disease within our body. But with the elimination, identification of visceral fat, and you eliminate it, the opposite happens. You have a slow improvement in the appearance and functionality of your muscles. Your body looks better, and they start performing better. So you can see that my appearance is dramatically enhanced in that image there.
Yeah, it's so interesting to think about recent movements about body positivity, one might say, including things like the dad bod and trying to normalize this condition of humanity as something rather benign or non-life-threatening. And you paint a very clear picture of just all the knock-on effects that the presence of this fat in our lives hampers us with. And if our viewers get anything out of this conversation, I hope that they get the message that these things have knock-on effects and complications, and it is really up to us to take control of our health. And these visuals are just such a powerful indicator of how you can do that, and what progress can look like over a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, it really is very much the case. In fact, I'll go back to that image with the guy with the dad bod, which is an interesting side story. Is this guy with this big belly was 63, and he and his wife had no children. And between here and here, he got rid of visceral fat, and his fertility improved. And so at the age of 63, he had a baby with his wife. which is kind of a shocking thing. But he was super happy. They had no children. Well, if you got a fertility problem, for God's sakes, get rid of your visceral fat, and before you go off and do all sorts of expensive fertility treatments, work on eliminating visceral fat if you're a woman or a man, and you will increase your reproductive capability. It's a really important aspect to your health, is your ability to reproduce, and it's significantly compromised if you have all that visceral fat. And so another example, of this in our health is in faces. So here is my face at the age of 48, and then my face today. And so I'm filled with visceral fat in this image here on behind me with the glasses. And as that visceral fat is eliminated, the inflammation and the consequences of the inflammation that is my face is burdened by gets eliminated, and then I get a much healthier appearance. In fact, it almost looks like two completely different people. And my own niece refused to believe that was me. She just, she'd only really known me. This is a 10-year difference in time. And so I moved up to Minnesota about 10 years ago. And so she's seen me healthy instead of where it was before. And so it will have that much of an impact on your face and your body when you purpose and you successfully get rid of visceral fat.
Yeah, seeing something like this, I mean, we talked about hope a little bit earlier, and you talked about investing in your body over time and getting results over time. And there's no better depiction of hope than seeing yourself transform and being unrecognizable, your former self, to where you are today. So love seeing that. And you mentioned, so these are some more like visual ways that we could see this transformation take effect. And you mentioned teaching doctors both MRI interpretation as well as CT interpretation. Can you talk a little bit about like what technology do we have available to detect visceral fat? I assume MRIs are the best method, given that you employ them in your practice. Are there other ways that we can detect this using technology?
Yeah, so a poor man's MRI, in my opinion, can be gleaned from love handles. So I'll just show you an example of love handles, which are these protuberant collections of fat outside of a person's body. So if you understand the relationship that I mentioned before with well, I don't know why my screen is gone off, but love handles that are in the back, in your back, are a concentration of deep subcutaneous fat, which corresponds to your visceral fat. So a poor man's MRI is to actually look at your abdomen, and so there's just pop back up. So the abdomen reveals visceral fat. You can see in your back whether you have this contribution of deep subcutaneous fat in your love handles. So rather than, if you can't afford to get an MRI scan, you can just take a look at whether you have love handles, and we'll give you an idea of how much visceral fat you have. And so I call it a poor man's MRI. A CT scan uses radiation, so while it does reveal visceral fat, and it is a study that is helpful, and this is what it looks like on a scan. It's just this dark fat inside instead of white. On a CT scan, it looks dark. And the next scan that you could get is a DEXA scan. But the problem with the DEXA scan is it only gives you a quantified digital representation of your visceral fat. It doesn't allow you to actually see it, and you can't see muscle fat in a DEXA scan. So you spend $100 to get a number, and it's basically like a laboratory test. So I've never seen anybody get a DEXA scan and have much influence or motivation from it. It certainly pales in comparison to get an MRI scan. MRI scans could be obtained anywhere from about $250 in some places in the country to as high as right here in Minnesota, $2,900. So they can be pretty expensive. They're all over the place based on local markets. So you can explore doing that. But another interesting biomarker that I think is also we're talking about is a proxy for visceral fat is spider veins. So spider veins represent these areas of inflammation on the skin. And maybe before I show a spider vein, I'll show inflammation just on the skin of the nose. So people have these, hopefully you can see, this shows up. I don't know how well that's showing up, but these dark dots on the nose are called sebaceous filaments. They're pores where oil gets secreted, oil that's beneficial for your skin, called sebum. Well, based on how much inflammation you have in your body, how much visceral fat, you'll get darkening of that oil because it's more easily oxidized through the inflammatory effects of visceral fat. So a proxy for visceral fat is the presence of these sebaceous filaments. Now, if you go to the mirror, you can see that. The lighter they are, the less visceral fat you have. The darker they are, the more amounts of visceral fat that you actually get. So it's an interesting proxy for looking at visceral fat. And then spider veins, most people are aware of them. They can be found on your eyelids, inside aspect to your ankles, and women oftentimes get them on their thighs, and men get them on the skin of their penis. And so you get these purple little tiny veins and vessels, and as you age, they become more pronounced, and they can literally change the color of your penis to a blue-purple look, and instead of the nice tan skin that you might have when you're more youthful. And as you eliminate visceral fat, those spider veins will be eliminated from your ankles, your legs, your foreskin, your penis, and your eyelids. And it's interesting, I'll mention, if you go out in the sunshine, you can see dramatic improvement in those spider veins from the influence of sunshine causing nitric oxide production. And so if you pay attention to it, it will reinforce your behavior to get out in the sun. We need more sun for more nitric oxide production. And the other things that will increase nitric oxide production and decrease immediately spider veins, like within minutes, is sprinting. So if you sprint, you'll eliminate your spider veins in a very short period of time, not permanently, but as the nitric oxide is flowing, you see dramatic improvement. Take photographs before you sprint, photographs after you sprint, photographs before you go in the sunshine, after you're out in the sunshine, and then a sauna. If you go into a sauna, it has a dramatic improvement temporarily on your spider veins, also through nitric oxide. And then fasting. If you do extended fasting, it will improve your spider veins before and after. So doing photographs is a really great way of tracking your improvement in your skin and overall your health. Your metabolism, your metabolic health can be reflected in the photographs and the appearance of your body. So I like to bring that to my clients' awareness, so they are paying attention when they're in the sunshine, they go in a sauna, when they're fasting, and when they're sprinting, they'll be able to see that. And I call that my human dashboard. So I tell clients that they can glance at their dashboard, pay attention to these things that are changing in their body, to help guide them drive that car in the right direction towards optimizing your health.
Yeah, I know Mike had some questions on practical ways of investigating this and reducing visceral fat. So I'll give the floor to him to ask some more questions.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. So at metabolichealth.com, we've sort of created this philosophy of health as a lifestyle. And so we've got 6 different dimensions to lifestyle. We've got diet, sleep, exercise, stress management, nature, and social connection. And so I'm seeing tons of parallels between what you've already talked about today. But what I'd like to do is maybe go through each of these areas and see kind of what protocols that you prescribe to your patients within each of these areas, and kind of maybe why you've implemented those protocols. So maybe let's start with the first one. What do you look to do with a patient's diet? I know you talked about eliminating processed foods. I know you talked about eating more grass-fed meat. Maybe what other parts of that equation should we be looking at in terms of diet?
Yeah, so really interesting contribution to eating that as a strategy that I exhort all my clients to do, and so far I've been successful getting everybody to do it, is incorporating fermented foods. And the reason why I implore and exhort my clients to eat fermented foods is not because they're food, but really for their microbial benefit. So fermented foods are rich in beneficial microbes, particularly bacteria, certain fungi, yeast, and single-cell organisms that go down and make positive contributions to your microbiome when things like processed foods contribute to speciation and composition of the microbiome of a more pathogenic, or what I call obesogenic, makeup. So fermented foods is really an important strategy, and I encourage my clients to chew fermented foods with their main course of their meal, which is usually a meat, and to incorporate those microbes into that meat when they're swallowing for their improved digestion and their long-term residence within the gastrointestinal community. So equal to cutting out processed foods is the addition of healthy food, like healthy grass-fed meats, healthy ruminants, game meat, and then fermented foods like kimchi, kvass, fermented sauerkraut, curtido, fermented dairy like yogurt, blue cheeses, fermented cheeses, and kefir. And these fermented foods really have been around for thousands of years. They're part of traditions of numerous healthy cultures, which have aligned with true longevity and better health span, where there's less disease present. And so also important to talk about with as far as an eating strategy is kind of a corollary opposite of that is the absence of eating. So fasting. So I have my clients adopt a practice of increasing fasting, particularly extended fasting, where I get my clients going much further than just intermittent fasting, but actually embrace ultimately a fasting period of 72 hours a week on average. So that's 3 straight days, 72 hours straight of 0 caloric eating. So no calories during that time. And the biggest cell and reason for doing that is autophagy, which is this state of optimizing existence where your cells are cleaning out and clearing up cellular debris and debris from just daily living and physiology. So it helps to eradicate disease. So autophagy is this very exciting, idealized state that everybody should be aware of and leveraging. and almost nobody is. I mean, people do intermittent fasting, but it is dose dependent, and it picks up as you fast longer. So it appears to be optimized right around 72 hours. And so that's where I have my clients ideally fasting about 72 hours, maybe to 96 hours. And that's where the majority, I have my clients fasting on a weekly basis. Ideally about 3 weeks out of the month, they'll do 72 hours. Maybe 1 week out of the month, they'll do 96 hours.
Wow, I've got to start incorporating some 72-hour fasts. I'm definitely a 16-8 type of guy. I don't eat breakfast. I eat my first meal, usually around 2:00. So that's definitely interesting. I would call you maybe carnivore adjacent, because it seems like you've got a lot of sympathies with the carnivore diet, with the exception of some of those fermented foods being things like sauerkraut or kimchi, right? A lot of those fermented vegetables. Why, I guess, like, what is, can you eat any fermented food, or is it, do you want to have more different kinds of fermented foods in your diet?
Yeah, so when it comes to eating fermented foods, I tell my clients to eat like Noah's Ark. Only 2 of every species. So you want a variety, and you want a small amount. So I say a good client goes and gets 20 jars and has like a quarter teaspoon of each one, throughout the day. So a very small amount, maybe, 5 tablespoons. So not much. We're not talking, you don't eat these for nutritional or food value, you eat them for their microbes. And an average client might just get 10 jars, and a poor client will only get 1 jar, and they'll hate it, and they'll just have 1 jar. So you want to get a variety. You eat small amounts, and with regard, it is different for a carnivore physician like myself, who I eat almost all my calories are in the form of meat. The caloric value of my ferments are actually quite small. But the objection that carnivores typically have traditionally to vegetables are because of these anti-nutrients and toxins, mycotoxins, plant defenses that are present within vegetable matter. But when you ferment vegetables, they're eliminated. How much? Well, in some studies, completely. Other studies show less so. And what it turns on is the degree to which the fermentation takes place in the conditions. So the longer the fermentation, the more idealized the conditions, the more these plant toxins are eliminated. So it's a bit of a trade-off. I'm sure that I get a small amount of these plant toxins, but the microbial benefits that I'm getting from those fermented foods more than make up, in my opinion, for the very, very small, tiny bit of toxins that I might get. And I will go so far as to say that I think a certain amount of those toxins are beneficial because of the hormetic effect that they have. And probably the best way to understand vegetables are they have a medicinal value. And so for those that are eating at the exclusion of meat, and they're not eating any animal proteins, I think they're getting way too many of those vegetables and are problematic. And so I think from anecdotal experience and using an MRI, the best eating strategy is predominantly a meat-based diet, and then fermented vegetables and fermented fruit. So fruit doesn't have the same degree of plant toxins and defenses that vegetables have, but they have something else, fructose. And that extra amount of fructose is dealt with again through fermentation. So I continue to eat mostly almost an entirely zero carbohydrate diet. But I'll point out to my carnivore colleagues that even though we say carnivore is zero carb, there are carbohydrates in meat in the form of glycogen and liver. There's a lot of glycogen stored. So it's really not the case that we're completely zero carb, but the capacity in which we absorb those carbohydrates are different than, in my opinion, than when they're consumed through exogenous carbs, through sugars and fruits and things along those lines. I choose to get the very small amount of carbohydrates I get from animal meats.
Great. I guess moving on to sleep. Let's say I'm a patient of yours and I'm doing everything right, but I just can't seem to sleep enough or with enough quality. What is typically your process to get that patient sleeping better?
Yeah, so I think the biggest contribution that we see are two things. One, artificial light. So we're replacing sunshine with artificial light. You want to get more bright sunshine during the day, and you want that sunshine two critical spots: in the morning during a sunset, and in the evening for a sunrise in the morning and sunset at night. And those two key times perfectly set your circadian rhythms. So anybody who's sleep impaired and having problems with sleep should cut out artificial light at nighttime. So you don't want to have incandescent lights, especially LED lights that oftentimes had high Kelvin spectrum with a blue light spectrum that is higher and shuts down your melatonin. And at nighttime, I start dimming my lights. Tonight is kind of an exception because I got this podcast going. But by now, I would have had my lights dimmed, and then I have beeswax candles in my house. And when you get around a campfire, when you go camping, boy, that campfire puts you ready for sleep. And you go to bed, well, boy, when you're camping, you sleep so well. So that campfire, in the absence of those artificial lights, really allow you to anecdotally see the important contribution of artificial light being eliminated and having the presence of the sunrise and sunset to set your circadian rhythm. So those are really, really important sleep strategies that I work very hard to educate my clients about so that they can optimize their sleep and not be contributing to visceral fat.
So just curious, if for whatever reason you can't, turn off all of the artificial lights at night or dim the lights, like, have you experimented at all with those blue light blocking glasses? Do those have any effect? Do you recommend those?
I do advocate them. They're a quick and easy way, put them on, and boy, at least with me, when I was using it before I was doing dimming of the lights, it would almost be like a drug. The melatonin would just start, oozing into my bloodstream when I put those glasses on. And so I think there are, you can Google them, you can get them off Amazon. I don't have any interest in Amazon, but there are a variety of blue blocking glasses. And for sure, you want to use those when you're looking at your cell phone at nighttime or your laptop, or watching an LED, big screen. Everybody's watching their big screen TVs, and these can really disrupt your circadian rhythm and your melatonin production. So I think blue blockers are a good strategy to employ. I really like the dimming lights, and you can actually program lights to dim in sequence to the sunset. And so as the sun is setting, your lights are dimming inside your house, which I find to be effective. I'm trying to get that system in my house right now. I have to manually dim lights, but that's what I'm working to follow the synchronization of the sunsets.
That's awesome. I guess we're going rapid fire now. So the next one is exercise. You mentioned sprinting. Curious to know, like, how much sprinting should people do? And then what are some other forms of exercise that people should maybe also consider?
Yeah, so sprinting is my favorite, and generally as an average, I like to get my clients to start sprinting anywhere from 1 to 6 sprints, depending on their age and their condition, about every other day. And then work up to the point that they're doing sprinting maybe 5 days a week at about 3 to 6 sprints a day. And then eventually maybe up to 6 to 10 sprints 4 to 5 days a week. And you get up to that. And distance wise is about 100 meters, which is what Usain Bolt would compete at and run in like 9.3 seconds, 9.2 seconds, whatever. And so about that distance. And sometimes I recommend clients to mix it up. So nature favors variety. And so sometimes you'll sprint, anywhere from, instead of 10 to 12 seconds, sprint maybe 15 to 20 seconds. On rare occasion, maybe do a 30-second sprint. And on a very rare occasion, like maybe once every 3 to 4 months, do a 60-second sprint. But ideally, your sweet spot should be around 12 seconds, 10 to 12 second sprints, and mix up the numbers and don't do the same routine every day. Nature likes variety. And note of caution, if you're older and you've had a lot of accumulation of visceral fat, and I mean by older, like in your 30s, you have got to be very careful about accelerating. You will very likely strain a hamstring. And so the degree to which you've accumulated visceral fat leaves you vulnerable to a hamstring injury, which can be very serious. Any accelerating force where you are doing max effort can produce a serious injury. Kevin Hart recently was in the news because he apparently tore his abdomen, which I'm interpreting as a hernia, from sprinting in a challenge race against a former NFL player, and I forget who that was, at a barbecue. And so as a result, he is wheelchair bound with a very serious injury. So you want to be very slow in your acceleration, because it's the acceleration where you get the injury. And the benefits come from the maximum speed that you eventually get to. So take your time, 30 seconds to get up to that maximum speed, and then just hold it for 6 to 12 to 20 seconds once you get there. So slow acceleration is my strong advice when you are getting started in sprinting.
That's great. And so I think my second part of that question was around other types of exercise. So maybe like resistance training, weightlifting. Are you a fan of that as well?
Yeah. Actually, resistance training, weightlifting is my second favorite form of exercise. And I'm guided by a study that looked at 10 different forms of exercise. And at the top was sprinting for producing a molecule called lactate, which is a type of a messenger molecule that burns fat and builds muscle. And that is a consequence of that molecule that gets produced in the largest quantity when you exercise. And sprinting is the best form of exercise in the 10 forms of exercise that were studied in that particular study. And the next one down was resistance training, weightlifting. And at the bottom of the list was jogging. So jogging produced the lowest amount of that beneficial molecule. And no surprise, it corresponds to my anecdotal experience with distance runners with regard to the amount of body fat that they had, harmful visceral fat, deep subcutaneous fat, and the amount of muscle that we saw in proportion to the degree to which people run and for how long, the length of time they've been running for. So yes, sprinting, weightlifting, and then the other ones that I also like are calisthenics, and then rock climbing and tree climbing. I think it's a great thing for adults to climb trees, practice mobility, strength. It's a really great form of exercise.
All right, I guess moving on to stress. What do you do if you get a patient who maybe they're doing everything right, but they're really stressed from personal obligations, work? How do you attack that one?
Yeah, so this is actually a photograph of a guy very stressed out in his job. He hated it. And he had a particularly bad week here because he went into cardiac arrest twice, had CPR, full cardiac arrest. And then this is his photograph, profound change in his face 3 months later. That's all, it was 3 months. And that's him after he changed his job, quit his job. It was stressful. And you can see the dramatic improvement in his face, how he appeared with the elimination of the consequences of stress, namely cortisol and visceral fat. So if you, I liken stress to like lions and tigers in our lives. If you cannot kill the lion and tiger, meaning solve the problem that's stressing you out, then you're going to have to migrate away from the lion and tiger. Get away, get a new job, and leave it. But sometimes the answer is you can't migrate. You're stuck for whatever variety of reasons with a particular problem. So then how do you solve that? I get my clients to deal with a physiological response of an unavoidable stressor in your life. You may have a sick child. You may have something that you simply cannot get rid of. And so what you have to do is take a lesson from nature. Antelopes would be stressed out by lions and tigers milling around them. It would be stressful for any of us if we had lions and tigers milling around us. But what eliminates the stress in the life of that antelope and reduces the cortisol stress hormone in its life is when the lion and tiger finally attacks and that antelope has to sprint away. And by sprinting, it actually abates the cortisol levels, at least temporarily, and improves the existence of the antelope. So if you have a stressful job, if you have a stressful event that happens, you get a bad phone call, a bad email, you have something bad happen to you, rather than perseverate on it, go out and sprint. Drop and do 50 push-ups. Go do 10 pull-ups. Go lift some weights. Blast the weights for a short period of time. Don't go to the gym for 2 hours and do this big circuit. You want to basically emulate what the antelopes do. You want a brief, maximally intense sprint, away from it. So go lift some weights for 5 minutes, maximally intensive, and you'll reduce cortisol better than if you're hanging out in the gym for 2 hours doing a big, long circuit. Does that make sense?
Definitely. And that sounds like fantastic advice. I actually heard you mention that on a previous podcast, and I've started implementing that in my own life. So thank you for that. The next one is nature. And I know you've mentioned sunlight, which obviously we're a huge fan of sunlight. You mentioned it from the perspective of regulating your circadian rhythm, and then also from a nitric oxide perspective. Are there any other elements of nature that you're a big fan of that you try to get your patients to get involved in?
Yeah, so just being out in nature will expose you to optimizing your microbiome. So an example, maybe I'll quickly pull up is myself in nature when I was just this past week out in nature, and I'll show you an example here. Well, let's see if my yeah. So I have it doesn't show up on that screen very good, but I have moccasins on, and I walk with natural moccasins, so I ground in nature to get the negative charges that are present in the ground. I wear single layer animal skin moccasins, and I walk along these paths out in nature, and very beneficial. It's very relaxing. I have fresh air, and it's incredibly soothing. I sleep way better when I get out in nature, and I try to do as much as possible as I can out in nature. So I have a stand-up desk in my backyard, which is pretty natural. it's so large and that I can't see anybody out there. So I go outside, there's no noise, and I will do, I will exist out in nature. And if I have to do work, I prefer to do it outside as much as possible in nature. And so I can be around fresh air, the microbiome, have contact with soil and grass, and be exposed to the elements which will help to abate stress. And besides, as you mentioned before, exposure to sunshine, and I can also exercise outside. So I think nature is something that's woefully unappreciated by the majority of people for its positive contribution. And I would say, it goes as far as to say, it's necessary contribution towards health. I mean, I just do not believe that you can secure a healthy existence when you stay inside. And the majority of people, sadly, spend way more time inside, and it's the exceptional individual that gets outside in nature on any kind of regular basis.
Definitely. I think that's fantastic advice as well. Our last dimension to our sort of health framework is social connection. And I don't know that I've heard you talk a whole lot about this one, so very interested in your perspective. I know one of the inspirations for this, there's a famous study called the Harvard Study of Adult Development, which is one of the longest running studies ever, that found that social connection is the largest predictor of longevity out of everything else. And wondering about your perspective on that, and if that's part of the protocol that you prescribe to your patients.
Yeah, very, very good. So yeah, I think loneliness kills people, and you need to have social interaction. And the bottom line is, we are meant to hunt and gather as a species, as a tribe. And I tell my clients I work with that the lone hunter, the lone wolf hunting, just doesn't hunt as well. And we're meant to exist with other people because we help each other out, we optimize each other. So very interesting, we kind of stumbled in this in our medical practice. Our practice is we formed a client group by accident because two clients wanted to talk to each other, and then they brought me into the group. We used WhatsApp, and then three of us were talking, and then they wanted to know if I had any other clients that wanted to join this WhatsApp group. And so I brought one other client, and then we brought another one in. Every time we added one, it got better. And now we got almost 150 clients in this group. And on a daily basis, there are people in there chatting away about sprinting, doing push-ups, doing pull-ups, eating fermented foods, eating grass-fed beef, using a sauna, doing a cold plunge. So all of these posts and videos and photographs, basically they're modeling the everyday hunt of biological optimization. So I tell my clients, it's an imperative that you have this social connection with other, we call each other alphas, out there hunting and gathering, pursuing biological optimization, and doing it on a collective basis, having this meaningful contact. Now that is an application of social connection. It's not as good as the real thing, but we're spread out all over the world. My clients are people that fly in from Asia, Australia, Europe, the United States, multiple sites. They're just all over the place. And so we can't really physically get together, but we are united in this particular app. And we are moving to have more connection. We're going to hopefully have our own conferences, and we're looking at opening up a second space for my practice down in Florida. And ideally, we're discussing having about 10 spots around the United States, and really globally outside the United States, where we can get together and have meaningful connections and conferences, and have meals together, and sauna sessions together, and sprinting sessions together, and sunsets and sunrises together, and microbiome dips in the ocean. All of these kind of activities, if you do them together with other people, have much more meaning and much more benefit than if you're doing it by yourself. So it's an absolutely imperative that you have you have social connections with other people, and you aggregate towards what our species, I think, biologically is adapted to do, which is living, as a clan and a tribe, and you work to optimize each other, not just exist, but to help everybody live better lives. I think that's our programming, that's what we're meant to do, and I think that's where we thrive.
Well, fantastic. I think we've covered a ton of ground over the last hour and change. And, just wanted to thank you once again for joining us and for sharing so many valuable insights. Ryan, did you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, and a great topic to end on, talking about the importance of social connection. We want to give you an opportunity to tell our viewers and listeners where the best places to find you on social media as well as the web are, and in particular for your practice, where the best place to reach you there is.
Yeah, so I'm excited to be an influencer and a contributor to content creator and social media. So for those of you who are interested in following me, you can go to Instagram, and I am on X or Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube under DrSeanOmara, just at Dr. Shan Oma. And I have a website that if you're interested in learning more about me and maybe potentially working with me to be considered to be a client, I can't even open up all the messages, but I do look for clients that are motivated or interesting. And if you are interested in becoming the best biological version of yourself, you can go to my website, read about me, and you can file a little contact form. My website is www.drSeanomara.com, and I'd be delighted to hear from you.
That's great. And then we also have a gift for all of our listeners and watchers, which is a promo code that will get you 30% off of Dr. Omara's ebook, audiobook, as well as community membership. We wrapped up talking about the importance of community, and I think this is just a great gift to you all for your willingness to learn and engage in this discussion. Lastly, just mention metabolichealth.com. Again, we're focused on improving and optimizing human health and bringing in experts from all over the world, world-renowned experts to lend their insights. So with that, Dr. Oma, again, thank you so much for your time. We know you're busy, and it was such a great discussion.
Well, thank you, Mike and Ryan. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you guys. I wish you all the best, your website, and I'd be happy to come back again.
We would love that. Have a good night.
Okay, you too.
Thank you, Dr. Shan.